In a previous video, I talked about how to use a light meter, and unfortunately, I wasn't very clear and I left a lot of people confused with a lot of questions. So I wanted to clarify some of those things because really, using a light meter should not be complicated. But I also want to talk to you about the real power of using a light meter because those tools are not just there to show you exactly what the right exposure is. It's here to help you be intentional about where different brightness level in your image should land on the dynamic range. I'll show you exactly what I mean. Let's dive right in. A light meter might be perceived as only an old person tool or a tool only used by high-end DPs in Hollywood. The reality is I got myself a light meter not too long ago simply because I felt like my cinematography skills got to a place where I wanted, one, to play with it, and two, have more control about what I'm measuring and how I'm measuring lights on sets, and see if that could help me create better shots. I mean, that's, at the end of the day, we're doing all of this, we're learning about cinematography so that we can get better and better at our craft. And so I felt like this was a tool that would give me more precise measuring over my image compared to like false color. I've been using false color for years. I still use false colors, but now I also complement it with using a light meter on set. Before you use one of these, you need to have a good understanding of what dynamic range is and understanding of what stops are. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here talking about those things. You can go back to some of my previous video to learn about dynamic range and stops. It's also a good thing to learn your stops table. So how do I use a light meter? Well, I only use a light meter in one specific mode, and that's the cine mode for video. I'm not interested in learning how to use the light meter for flash photography or any of those things. For me, it's all about what they call the HD or the HD cine mode, which is for cinematography. And so what's really important about that mode is to make sure that your meter is set correctly, exactly like your camera is. So the setting on your light meter should match the setting on your camera. And so here you can see that my ISO is based at 800, my shutter speed is 1/60th, and my frame rate is 2398. Now we can see that on this lens, my aperture is set to 2.8. And that's very important because we are now saying that we're gonna measure middle gray at a f2.8. And middle gray is not something abstract. I've had some interesting comments on past video where people were like, what is this notion of middle gray anyway? It's not real. No, middle gray is a real thing. It's an 18% gray color, 18% reflective gray, and that is the base of the dynamic range for all the cameras. How many stops above middle gray does it see? How many stops below middle gray does it see? And the light meter, all it does is it's going to measure and tell us what our aperture setting should be in order to make sure that middle gray is exposed properly. So that's kind of the reference on everything we're going to do. So if I point this towards the light, take a measure, I now get a 2.8, and that tells me this side, middle gray, is exposed properly. If I point this light, let's say, away from my light source, and I push the button, it now gives me a reading of 1.4. So it says, hey, you're underexposed. You should change your aperture to 1.4 in order to expose middle gray correctly. We don't want to change the aperture on our camera. We're only using this as a reference to tell us how dark or how bright any area is. And so again, we got a 1.4. So this tells me that that side of my image is 2 stops darker than this side of the image. Hopefully that makes sense. You're just counting how many different stops there are between your reading and your aperture on your lens. Now, there's something very important that we need to understand here. Incident lighting and reflected lighting. Those are 2 different modes. Incident lighting is using the lumisphere. How much light is actually coming into this lumisphere? Okay, how much light is shining towards my face? That's incident lighting. Reflected lighting is exactly what it sounds like, is the amount of light bouncing off my face going into the camera. And that to me is the most important value. I'm not really interested in how much light is coming in. I'm interested in how much light my camera is seeing. So most of the time I will use reflected light. That's why it was important to use, to get a light meter with the scope, because when you measure just the incident light, you have no idea of what the material is doing. If we do it for my skin tone, which we know skin tone should be anywhere between 1 and 1.5 stops above middle gray. If I measure it this way, I'm still on the incident lighting. I'm gonna get, you guessed it, 2.8, because we still haven't changed any of our lighting. If I switch it to reflective lighting and I point, it's gonna be difficult, but I'm gonna try to hit the very bright spot of my face. There you go. And so now, using reflective lighting, we get that my face is 1 stop overexposed. So that's something to keep in mind, because the first time I used a light meter, I borrowed one, it didn't have a scope, and it just right away, within 2 minutes, I was like, oh, that's not the right tool, at least for me, because I'm not actually measuring what the camera sees. And you can make a lot of mistakes that way. So hopefully this makes sense. What you want to do when you use your light meter, you set your camera settings the way you want it. I want to shoot at 2.8. I match all the setting on my light meter. I can now turn the light, and I'm going to keep using the scope and measure reflective lighting and raise the intensity of that light. And I'm going to take measurement until I get to that 4.0. And that tells me that that face is now 1 stop over middle gray. I'm shooting this on an FX3. I also typically work on with an FX6. Both of them have the same dynamic range. We're working at ISO 800, which is base. We have 6 stops of highlights above middle gray, and we have 9 stops of shadows below middle gray. I want you to start thinking about exposure, not as just, this is the right exposure. I want you to be more intentional. I want you to step into a scene and decide, okay, this scene is going to be very dark or very bright or whatever. And so I want to make sure that my highlights sit somewhere on that dynamic range. Are they going to be 2 stops above, 3 stops above, 4 stops above, 6 stops above middle gray? Are my shadow, my dark spot, my dark corner in the room, where is that going to sit? Is it 2 stops below, 3 stops below? Remember, we have about 9 stops. Now, the reality of the dynamic range is 6 stops, meaning your clip at 6 stops. So everything is pure white. So if you want something to be very bright but not clipping, you probably shouldn't put it at 6 stops. I would probably put it at 5 stops. In the shadows, we have 9 stops, but the reality is the last 2 or 3 stops are pretty noisy. Now 9 stop, it's gonna be pure black, so you crush the blacks. It may not be very noisy. Stop number 8 and 7 are gonna be pretty noisy. So typically if you wanna do something pretty dark, you're still gonna expose a little higher up, and then in post-production, you can lower those levels. So you wanna capture the image with no noise. And so instead of trying to land something at stop number 8, you may capture it at stop 6, for example, and then in post-production, lower stop 6 to a 7, 8, or a 9 if you want it to be pure black. And that's one way to avoid noise in your image. So I wanted to test this out, so I'm going to turn some things off, okay? In theory, we're starting this way, of a blank canvas. And what is it that we want to do? What is the vision for this particular shot? We know we want the face to be 1 stop above. So I'm going to turn on just the key light. I haven't changed the intensity, so it should be about the same, but let me turn it on. So it's still at 65%. Let's turn it on. Okay. And we can measure it quickly. I can do it. We can try to do the reflective again. So again, we want to see a 4. It should be about right. Yep. So I still have a 4. Okay. So now we know my skin is exposed correctly. But now we have some decisions to make as far as the rest of the picture. Where do we want it to land? How deep do we want those shadows behind here? Like along that light over there, it's very, very dark. And we have to make decisions. Like, is that too dark, not dark enough, whatever we want to do. And so let me turn on these lights. And those are actually on the dimmer. I don't control those with an app. I control them with the dimmer. But let's lower those. Maybe we want something a little bit more moody. Here we go. And I can actually measure the brightness of that area. And again, I'm not going to do it with the incident lighting. I'm going to do it with the reflective. And so I'm going to point. I'm going to try to be in the same line as the lens. And I'm going to hit kind of this area first, and then I'll try to do a measurement of the white as well. And so the back wall, the orange wall, comes at 2.8. And so my skin is one stop above middle gray. That orange is middle gray. So there's one stop difference between that particular spot of orange and my face. If I look at the bright area here, so right under the light on the white wall, there we go. I get a 5.6, 2 stops above middle gray. Now let's work on this lamp. Maybe we want to turn that one on at about the same level. I want you guys to be intentional about how you build your lighting, how you build your scene. So I'm going to turn that one on. I can control that one from the app. We can turn it on, and here, let's get it right here. Okay, so let me hit and measure the orange right above the light. Okay, 2.8. Let's let the autofocus figure it out. Right here. 2.83. So we're a little lower. That orange is a little lower than the other one. So I can raise that a little bit. I'm at 7%. Let's raise a little bit. Let's go here. So let's take another reading of that orange right above the light. 2.85. I wanted to get to a 2.7 or 2.87, which is what we had on the other orange. Okay. Ugh, it's all backwards. Here you go. So this is a 2.88. So they're very close to be identical. This orange and that orange are about the same. Okay. And I may say, you know what? I like that. That's the mood that I want. And now we can measure the very dark spot, like maybe right under the light switch plate, the white plate. So I'm going to hit right below the light switch. And this gives me a 1. So that's 3 stops below middle gray is that area right behind the plate. And so we're fine. We shouldn't get any grain in there. Now, just as an exercise, let's say we want this to be a little brighter back there. I can turn on, I have a backlight that I can turn on. Let me see. Let's measure first that wall. So I want to measure kind of like right behind me, like somewhere right here, which is where that backlight is going to hit. So let me measure that. I'm going to hit kind of like the middle of that wall, and I get a 2.0. So 2.0 meaning 1 stop below middle gray. So that wall is 1 stop below. So let me turn on the background. Okay. Now what do we get? Let's measure that. Oops. 2.81. So now the wall is exactly middle gray. So now there is 1 stop separation between me and the back wall. Looking at my face, we do have a very good contrast here. I can try to measure it, try to capture this side of my face. It's a 2. Okay, so that tells us there is 1 stop difference between my key light and my fill side. Okay, so we have a 2.1 or 2-to-1 ratio on my face. And so again, now we can make decisions on, now there's a white wall here. Do we want to cover that with a neg, trying to get something darker here? If this video was helpful in understanding how to use a light meter or help you see exposure in a different way, make sure you like and subscribe to the channel for more tips on cinematography. If you still have questions or if things were still not clear, Make sure you post those in the comments. I'd love to answer some of those questions. And if you want to learn more about cinematography, check out my online course about camera settings. Thanks for watching, and happy filming.